From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
President Biden wraps meetings at the G7 summit in Italy against the backdrop of a more aggressive China. We talk with Taiwan's representative to the U.S., Tah-ray Yui, about the threat from Beijing and what it means for the semiconductor industry.
The Supreme Court tosses out the federal ban on bump stocks implemented after the 2017 mass shooting in Las Vegas. This after the justices preserved abortion pill access in a ruling earlier this week. We'll have more on how court decisions are influencing voter opinion with Democratic pollster Celinda Lake.
And Donald Trump celebrating his 78th birthday with a fundraiser and a rally this weekend in Michigan. We'll have the latest from the campaign trail coming up with our political panel. Kaylee, happy Friday.
Yeah, TGIF.
It's been a week of weeks here in the world of politics. Imagine we started this whole thing with EU elections coming out of Sunday into Monday. Then it was Hunter. And then it just kept on going from there.
Federal Reserve decision, Trump on the Hill and with business leaders yesterday. And as we mentioned, multiple Supreme Court decisions happening in between. And that was just what happened mostly here in the States. Of course, a lot was happening abroad as well with President Biden in Italy. And he is just now leaving as we speak.
Yeah, in fact, wrapping up his meetings today and getting aboard Air Force One in Italy. Of course, meeting with G7 leaders today, heading back to Washington this hour. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see a live view of Air Force One right now. Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern has been there covering the trip, traveling with the president, and joins us now live from Bari, Italy. Annmarie, now that this is in the books, what are the takeaways? We talked a bit about Ukraine, the deliverables for this president.
Well, Ukraine was certainly the big deliverable for the U.S. administration, not just the signing of the bilateral security agreement yesterday, which really pushes forward as well to the NATO meeting that will be in D.C. in the next few weeks, but also the frozen Russian assets. We learned more about that deal today. Now that there's the political will there, the technocrats will really get to work to make sure that that $50 billion loan will be paid to Ukraine before the end of the year. Two key things we learned from a senior administrative official briefing reporters on the ground here. One is that it's not just going to be the United States. There's a signal from Europe that they want to take part of this, and also Japan is trying to figure out how they can also take part of this. And Canada is talking about that they for sure are going to make sure that they are sending about $5 billion worth of that to Ukraine as well. What is interesting now is what happens at the European Union level. The United States is very confident, given the fact that you have Germany, France, Italy here, and also representatives from the EU, that they can get all the EU 27 to sign up to make sure that in concrete terms, those frozen assets remain immobilized. Because remember, those are on a 6-month renewal right now at the EU. So that's a big part of this process. So even though it was a huge win for this administration, this story is going to considerably continue to develop over the next couple of months.
And of course, Annmarie, that's really just in regard to Ukraine. There were a lot of other subjects broached at this G7, including the challenges presented by China. I know that's something you spoke about with Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, earlier today. This is what he told you, and we'll have you tell us more.
It's not an either or. By just China. People are borrowing money from India. They're borrowing money from the United States. They're borrowing money from the UK. Remember this, bilateral creditors have been around for a long time. It may be called ODA in some cases, maybe actual lending through some countries. There are countries borrowing bilaterally as well. I don't think it's an either or.
So, Annmarie, obviously, him talking to you about the competition in lending. What were the other takeaways from your conversation?
Well, he might not see it, Ajay Banga, as a complete either or when it comes to China or the West, but many would point to the fact that China is the biggest bilateral creditor And some would even say that now there's a debt trap when it comes to a number of countries, specifically in Africa. So you had on the sidelines of yesterday's meeting, and something the president really wanted to focus on, as well as the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, is more private investment going to places like Africa. For the United States, though they may not come out and say it, this is clearly an alternative to some of these countries looking to Beijing. And for someone like Giorgia Meloni, this is a pitch she really tries to have at home domestically, build up jobs in Africa, food security, energy security, to try to quell some of the migration flows. That's one of the big takeaways I had on the sidelines here when it comes to China, not just when it comes to debt, but also the communique will reflect the fact that they want to go after China in terms of its enabling of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, as well as its overcapacity. And one final thought I'll say on my conversation with the World Bank president was he talks about not just the World Bank looking at impoverished countries, but also a more holistic approach, things like climate as well. And I asked him if that was at risk if we were to see a Trump presidency. And he said, look, Trump was willing to boost capital investment in his last presidency, and he's prepared for potentially him doing that again. Whether or not we get Trump or Biden, he feels like the World Bank is going to get that boost from the United States.
All right, Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern live in Italy this evening. Safe travels back. Thank you so much. Now, speaking of former President Donald Trump, he's set to campaign in the swing state of Michigan this weekend, following his meetings yesterday with congressional Republicans on Capitol Hill here in Washington, and of course today, his 78th birthday. Joining us now with more is Bloomberg's Hadriana Lowenkron. So, Hadriana, obviously, Donald Trump is no longer here in Washington. He is now in Florida. I understand a big birthday celebration going to be happening in Palm Beach tonight. What will the significance be of this weekend for his campaign?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, he's been very busy. He was in D.C. I think something big to note there is speaking not just with members on the Hill, but also big CEOs, business leaders, people who he's looking for in terms of donors. And so we know that after a lot of these legal events that have happened, including his conviction in New York, that he was getting a lot of money from small dollar donors. Now we're looking to see where can he go in terms of Wall Street. And this was one of the events he was talking about, cutting the corporate tax rate to 20%. He's really appealing to this demographic. And then, as you mentioned, he's headed to Detroit. He's looking to, court Black and Hispanic voters, union members. Michigan's going to be big. And so we'll see what comes of that.
Michigan's going to be big, all right. And some of these economic proposals will be tested there. Donald Trump floating the idea again, as Hadriana mentions, tariffs to pay for income tax cuts, thinking, of course, of extending or making the Trump tax cuts permanent. We ran that past former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers in his conversation with David Weston on Wall Street Week.
Replacing the income tax with revenue with tariff would be the worst macroeconomic policy proposal in U.S. history.
So how do you really feel? It's an interesting reaction to something that actually had, to your point, the attention of 90 CEOs here in town yesterday. Now, Donald Trump has to put all of this together, just like Joe Biden's going to try to for a debate. And that's less than 2 weeks off. They both have little time to prepare for this. And Joe Biden, as we were discussing, has been overseas, 2 trips overseas. He's going to California now before he gets to Camp David to start bearing down. Do they have enough time to get ready for this?
We're going to see. Obviously, this is something that the country will be looking at. It's very early on. Usually we don't have debates until later. We have another one, I believe, on the books for September. We'll see what comes of that. But, for now, they each have been kind of doing some debate prep. They have kind of people in their close circles. What'll be interesting about this is that so many Americans' minds have already been made up. And, usually we look at debates for the entertainment value. We're looking, who has, that quip or who has that kind of one-liner that people remember. Now it's who's going to mess up and who does not mess up. And so I think maybe they'll be each kind of hoping the other person talks more, giving the other person that chance. But, in terms of what to expect, obviously there's the economy and there's immigration is really top of mind. So we'll see kind of whose message really appeals to the public.
So it's presidential debate as NASCAR race now. Bloomberg's Hadriana Lowenkron. We thank you for being with us at the table. Coming up on Balance of Power, pollster Celinda Lake will be live on set with us with reaction to the Supreme Court decisions of these past 2 days. Another today on bump stocks. following the Mifepristone ruling yesterday. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There are any number of threats to Mifepristone access that are not based on the exact legal arguments in this case, but this ruling doesn't even shut down the exact legal arguments in this case. And we know already that the states of Kansas and Missouri have vowed to bring their own claims and are arguing that they have a better case for standing than did the plaintiffs here.
That was Mary Ziegler, law professor at the University of California, Davis, talking with us here on Balance of Power right at this time yesterday following the Supreme Court's ruling on Mifepristone, the mail-order abortion pill. We have another ruling today, of course, involving guns, the bump stock ban being struck down by the court. And we want to connect the political dots on these with pollster Celinda Lake, the president, Lake Research Partners, back with us here at the table. It's great to see you.
It's great
Celinda.
to be here. Thank you for having
joining
me.
us here on a Friday that ends what felt like an endless week. Are you ready to relive all of this? Because the political ramifications of each day, you could write a book about. Let's start with the Supreme Court. Start with Mifepristone, for that matter. Yesterday, a lot of folks saw this as a box checked. But as we discussed with some smart legal minds yesterday, this is an issue that's still wide open, and I presume in your mind, still a hot issue on the campaign.
Still a very hot issue on the campaign, and medication abortion's wildly popular. And what's really interesting is the numbers didn't move an iota. They didn't move a molecule, because people think, okay, they decided this today, well, what are they going to take away tomorrow? And we still got the decision coming up from Idaho of the jailing healthcare providers, and wait till that one hits. So people think, you know, once you took away Roe v. Wade, you can do anything, and maybe there's a little blip, and you think you checked the box, but you got a long way to go.
But when we consider the issues that people are actually going to vote on, do you believe that abortion still will be, as it was in 2022, the galvanizing, turnout-driving issue for the voters that Biden needs if he wants re-election over the economy or immigration?
I think for turnout, no one's going to turn out over this economy. So I think for turnout, abortion is a big deal, particularly for younger women and for African-American women who think it's life and death, Latinas who love contraception even more and think that a contraception could be done away with. They're firm believers in that because that's what happened in Mexico and Central America. So, yeah, I think it's a big deal for turnout. I think when you ask most important problem, you know, it's down at 9%. When you ask what are you going to vote for, it's tied with the economy at 46%.
I don't know where Hunter Biden falls on this list, but as we walk through the path of this week, that was a big moment. We spent the better part of 24 hours talking about this guilty verdict. Is this the media trying to overcompensate in struggle to not show a bias against Donald Trump, or is this something that matters politically?
No, I think it's the media overstriving, and I think this is just a personal family issue, and frankly, there are an awful lot of families in America, as Dr. Biden and President Biden have said, that have struggled with substance abuse in their families. And I think everybody just feels like there's nothing but sadness here.
Do you think, though, net-net, that this is something that will actually potentially improve opinion of the president, because it is just an American family? You're seeing perhaps a more sympathetic side. I had people responding to Biden's statement that I posted on Twitter saying, as a former addict, I respect this statement. I may be a conservative, but I respect what he's doing as a father. Does it actually have the reverse effect as to what everybody might have thought a conviction for Hunter Biden might be?
I think what has the reverse effect is the stark contrast with Donald Trump saying, I'm going after the judge, I'm going after the jurors, I'm going after immunity for the rest of my life and beyond in the Supreme Court, and Joe Biden saying, no, the judicial process has spoken, I'm not pardoning my son. That's just such an ultimate contrast in character and leadership.
Well, speaking of which, fast forward a day and Donald Trump cannonballs into the pool here in Washington with quite the return, his first time on Capitol Hill since January 6th. What did you make of the optics there? Mitch McConnell reaching across the table to shake his hand, the endless standing ovations when he walked into a room. He's obviously got the support of Republicans in Washington.
Well, what he's proven is that the MAGA Republican Party has taken over the Republican Party. And we've actually tested this. People are stunned that the Republicans have spoken. And you've got people running for, attorney general in remote states or, treasurer who are commenting on the Trump verdict. And people think, who even asked your opinion on the Trump verdict?
Who's stunned? How are they stunned?
I think they're stunned because they think this was an isolated incident. Why are all these people coming on board? And it improves our chances of getting people to vote non-MAGA in Congress and Senate, because people think, oh boy, this is quite the cult now. And we want to even if we're going to vote for Trump, we want to balance that vote. So it helps us tie everything together. I think it's good for us. And it's just mystifying for me to see a party taken over. I was born and raised Republican, not this kind of Republican.
Wow.
Yeah, perhaps we have seen an evolution in the party itself, but we also have had Donald Trump in these meetings making some news with what he said, whether it was in regard to tariffs or taxes, or in this idea that apparently in at least the meeting with House lawmakers, a number of them told me, talking about states that he thinks could be in play. Spending money there, New York, New Jersey, Virginia. Celinda, do you actually think Virginia could be in play?
Only if he changes his position on abortion. Virginia is very, very pro-abortion state. But no, and I think some of these states are closing. I think that it will be a tight race. I think that, Minnesota, Virginia, some of these races are closing. But honestly, when he claims California and New York, if he's going to go for California and New York, those two states should just secede right now so the rest of us can move there. That is never happening.
I'm not sure that is going to happen. So 2 weeks from last night, the debate.
Yeah.
Is this make or break? Is the election decided that night?
I don't know if the election's decided, but I think it could be a big moment for both candidates. And I think, the expectations are so low for President Biden. I think he's going to do a fantastic job. He's a great debater. And I think that he'll really show that he knows. He'll really show his mastery of the issues. God knows what Trump is going to do. I mean, I don't know which Trump's going to show up. The stalking one or the incompetent one or the crazy self-centered one. So it'll be interesting.
You say it's an opportunity for Biden to show the mastery of his issues, but I wonder to what extent this is actually not at all about the issues and about performance. And Joe Biden showing he can do this at 81. Knowing that today is Donald Trump's 78th birthday. They're only 3 years apart. Joe Biden cannot shake the age issue to the extent that Donald Trump seems to have. Do you have an explanation as to why?
I think age is just a way that people express strength versus weakness, effectiveness versus ineffectiveness, the fact that we can't break through on our accomplishments. I think it's a bigger metaphor. I think also people don't like seeing Trump. His most effective ads are actually when he's not talking and not in them. And so I think that that's one of the things of the debate. People will get to see Donald Trump again, and they're going to go, oh my gosh, I had no idea he looked this old and he's this stooped and he's this crazy.
Well, that's saying a lot there. The bar, you say, is low for Joe Biden. But to prove people that there's not an age issue here, he could be overcompensating, right? Does he do a triple gainer when he comes out? He's like one-arm push-ups. What does he do other than, I guess, what we saw at the State of the Union to make that case?
Yeah, I think he just does State of the Union, too.
Yeah.
I don't think he could do anything better. It'll energize Democrats. People really liked the State of the Union, thought he looked very competent. And I think that I would like to see, I think the debate is a major time to show steady leadership, knowledgeable leadership versus chaos and narcissism. And that is an axis I'd like to run on.
Wow.
All right. Democratic pollster Celinda Lake, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll have a chance to speak with you again.
I'd love it.
Around debate
Thanks,
time.
Celinda.
We appreciate your time. Now coming up still, our conversation with Alexander Tah-ray Yui, Taiwan's representative to the United States. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
What the court did today is really rolling back what otherwise is important progress to be made to prevent gun violence in America. And frankly, when we think about the decisions voters are going to make in November, there's a clear contrast between where we stand and the former president.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today reacting to the Supreme Court's decision to toss out a federal ban on bump stocks. This happened in a 6-3 decision. Essentially, what the court was tasked with, Joe, was deciding whether or not a bump stock makes a semi-automatic weapon a machine gun. The court said no. But it's worth reminding our listeners on Bloomberg Television and radio that this ban had gone into effect during the Trump administration. That's right. After the 2017 mass shooting, in which a shooter using bump stocks in Las Vegas killed 60 people and wounded hundreds more. Still the deadliest mass shooting the U.S. has ever seen. I was struck to read that again this morning. I believe it was 58 deaths, if I remember correctly, in Las Vegas that night. Bump stocks were not part of the popular lexicon until that happened, and it started a debate around the country, Kaylee. There are 15 states actually have their own bans on bump stocks because everyone went into their separate corners for a while to debate this. The federal ban that was put in place, to your point, by the Trump administration no longer exists. So a win in this case for the NRA. Yeah, and a loss for others who were advocating for this ban to be put in place, including Congresswoman Dina Titus. She's from Nevada. Her district actually includes the Las Vegas Strip. And we spoke to her earlier today on the early edition of Balance of Power.
The ATF under Trump made this ruling to try to circumvent legislation, probably knowing full well that it would be struck down by the courts. We knew it. I don't know why they wouldn't know it. So it was a symbolic gesture, and it's just taken this long to finally have the truth come out. And in the meantime, we've been trying to get that legislation passed so we wouldn't be subject to the ruling of this very conservative and insensitive Supreme Court.
So the Congresswoman has put forward legislation to ban bump stocks that hasn't yet received a vote. We did see the majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, in the aftermath of this decision, putting out a statement saying that Senate Democrats are ready to pass legislation, but they'll need votes from Senate Republicans. And it's just not clear that those votes would be there. It's probably unlikely in an election year, particularly after the difficulty we saw around debate for a red flag law on the federal level. This would be probably more where that came from. There's always something called the lame duck session, though. We'll have to see if this comes up again. But the Congresswoman was not very happy this morning when the ruling hit here. There are, of course, a number of other rulings coming up in this term, Kaylee. We've got 2 weeks left and 24 more opinions to come, including another one on guns and, of course, the big one, the presidential immunity question. Yeah, set to rule on Donald Trump's question as to whether or not he could be prosecuted here in Washington in Jack Smith's 2020 election subversion case. Everyone expects that that will come at the very end of the term. But, of course, Joe, we'll be on watch for the next 2 weeks to see when that drops. Only have 2, I guess, left opinion days, but it's likely that we'll add more to the calendar. So stay with us on Balance of Power, and we'll keep you posted over the next 2 weeks as these rulings emerge. You'll, of course, hear about them right here on Bloomberg. Coming up, our conversation with Taiwan's representative to the U.S., Alexander Tah-ray Yui. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. The G7 meeting wrapped up in Italy today, and a joint statement released by leaders of member nations mentioned China 29 times, including in the context of Taiwan. The statement reads in part, "We reaffirm that maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is indispensable to international security and prosperity. There is no change in the basic positions of the G7 members on Taiwan, including stated one China policies. We call for a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues." Now, earlier today, we spoke with Taiwan's representative to the U.S., Alexander Tah-ray Yui, and started our conversation by asking about whether China has overreacted to the democracy's new administration.
As President Lai had a Time cover page a couple of days ago where he was interviewed, and they asked the same question, and he said that PRC's trying to absorb Taiwan into one of them is part of their national policy. So that's their ultimate objective. So they're just trying to find excuses to act up against Taiwan. So a free exercise of democracy in Taiwan, presidential elections. It's a subject of discuss from the Chinese side, and that's why they reacted that way. But we are determined to keep the way we live, the way we are, and to keep every 4 years electing our president, and they like it or, whether they like it or not.
Of course, Taiwan produces 90% of the world's most advanced computer chips. They call it your silicon shield.
Right.
As the U.S. moves to reshore, as we say, semiconductor manufacturing, do you worry that makes Taiwan more vulnerable? Does it increase the risk of conflict with Beijing?
Not at all. I think that there's been debate in Taiwan whether we should keep the shield, as thick as possible by having all the production in Taiwan. But with the advent of AI, which is already part of our lives, but it's just the beginning, and more will be intertwined with our daily lives, AI needs a lot of these super chips. And it's not a matter of, Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC, said it himself, it's not a matter of how many dozens of millions more chips we need, but how many dozens of fabs we need. So the need for the production will be astounding, explosion of need for these super chips. And I don't think we can make them all in Taiwan, because we are, after all, a small island. So putting other plants in other countries where rule-based countries where rules are followed, we follow we follow the law, we follow the rules, such as the United States, such as Japan, such as Germany. It makes sense. We become part of the production chain. We become partners. And actually, in that way, I think we're better linked and better protected because we're partners. If Taiwan, part of the supply chain, is disrupted, we will all feel the danger and the pain. So actually, interconnection is much better than doing everything by ourselves. Besides, the majority of the production will still be made in Taiwan for the time being, for the foreseeable future.
So how is this administration thinking about balancing investing more in fabs, in Taiwan specifically, versus making these investments in the other countries with which you're referencing?
Well, it's not the government, it's the companies, and they
can do things to incentivize it.
Yes, actually, the entire semiconductor industry in Taiwan was born out of the incentives from the government. When Dr. Morris Chang was invited by the government to come to Taiwan to realize the idea that he had on how to produce semiconductors. But obviously nowadays the companies they think for themselves, and they, profit margin wise, etc. But also, again, it makes sense, and I think it's a good idea to put the plants where rules are followed. There was some production in mainland China, and some of them are leaving, but for many reasons, economic reasons, hostile environment between Taiwan and mainland China. Mainland China has passed national security laws that infringes on the rights of our citizens. For example, any company or individual aiding and abetting the splittist movements in Taiwan are subject to confiscation of their properties, which means any individual company from Taiwan who are based in China, production, who are paying taxes to the Taiwanese government, they could be subject to those punishments. So obviously, it's a big thing. So putting resources in other countries, it does make sense.
When we consider what's happening in the Taiwan Strait, the tensions that we've seen over the balance of this administration and going back before that, your predecessor at times talked about some of the delays that were being experienced in delivering U.S.-provided military aid and weapons systems to Taiwan. The Admiral Paparo, who's in charge of the Indo-Pac command, was speaking to the Washington Post recently about this hellscape strategy that would involve thousands of unmanned submarines, ships, and drones that have yet to be provided, knowing that President Xi has targeted 2027 for his military to be prepared for such an invasion. Are you concerned now that Ukraine is at the front of the line and weapons delays might grow worse?
Well, indeed, many of the weapon systems that was approved to sell by the United States to our country has been delayed. Many of them we already made the necessary payments. We're still waiting delivery, and that's an issue we are constantly talking and coordinating with the U.S. administration. And the U.S. administration is also, in conjunction with Congress, we've thought of different ways to alleviate that process. For example, presidential drawdown authority, which directly, from the president, it gives some of the equipments that are already available, or foreign military financing, which is not only we buy, but also grants that allows us to buy, or even using existing U.S. stockpiles to give it to Taiwan first, and then the money goes back into the U.S. coffers. So we're trying to find different ways to accelerate and equip the necessary military equipment that we need to defend ourselves against possible aggressions. 2027, it's been mentioned a lot. It's sort of like a starting date for Chinese PRC's invasion. Actually, it's a symbolic because it's the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army. So it's, but again, we know that they are preparing for the possibility of doing this aggression against Taiwan. But we're also preparing, and with the help of many friends, including the United States, to deal against this possible threat. We have increased our defense budget. We are increasing our, modifying our defense ministries, the way of doing things. And also talking about asymmetric warfare. So we're also adjusting our strategy in how to deal with the island defense of Taiwan, including the whole of society resiliency. It's not only just the military, but also on the civilian side, civil defense. How does the civilian side react in the times of crisis of war? We're looking a lot of examples from Ukraine. Sure. Also, warfare today, it will be different, starting from the Ukraine scenario. You will not see. You will not see there will be a drone in every or unmanned system in every war situation nowadays. Yes. And that started with Ukraine. So we're adapting, but we're doing our part, but also with the system in the United States. China, will they act or not? We don't know. But as Admiral Paparo said, obviously any concept or any strategy that deals with stopping mainland China from thinking about attacking Taiwan is a good one. So again, there's also been said by other people, says we want to make sure that every day when Xi Jinping wakes up and looks at himself at the mirror before he shaves, he go, not today. And that's what we're trying to do.
And you need the United States partnership, you say, in doing so. But we don't know who will be leading the United States come January of 2025. How would a second Donald Trump presidency versus another term for Joe Biden play out differently for Taiwan? Because the U.S.-China relationship may be different in nature, and that could ultimately impact you.
Sure. That's the wonder of democracy, that every certain time of period, 4 years, 5 years, we get to elect a new administration or a continuation of this administration. And I feel very warm-hearted to be posted to the United States at this time, because the support that we get from the United States is bicameral and bipartisan. And we have worked with President Trump during his, previously, and during his administration, we made a lot of advancements between our Taiwan and U.S. relations. A lot of the equipments were sold during President Trump's administration. A lot of the limitations that we had in dealing with the U.S. administration was open during his administration. So we had a very good working relationship. And with President Biden's administration, obviously a lot has also happened. And now every time we explain how the status of Taiwan-U.S. relations are, we say it's rock solid, and it is. So
you have confidence it will remain.
Whoever will be inaugurated January 20th in the United States, we are very confident that this relationship will continue as is, and very solid and ever improving.
Well, a lot of things are said in campaign season here. We call this silly season we're getting into here in the U.S. Do you worry, as everyone tries to out-tough each other on China, that Taiwan is left in the middle as this political football? Would you, for instance, welcome a delegation with the Speaker of the House, a visit from Mike Johnson? We remember what happened last time a speaker went to Taiwan.
Well, again, the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, very staunch defender of democracy and human rights. She made the trip to Taiwan about 2 years ago. And again, the Chinese PRC is trying to blame her for causing all the tensions. Yeah. But actually, there's been previous visits by U.S. speakers to Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And they're just trying to find excuses to act up against Taiwan, mm-hmm. be it a visit from a prominent figure from the United States or other countries, be it a presidential inauguration, etc. So that's not the root cause of why we have tensions in the Taiwan Straits. It is Beijing who is doing that. It is Beijing who are sending the ships. It is Beijing who are sending the fighters around Taiwan. It is they who are creating all the tensions in the Taiwan Straits. So, no, I think both, we are good partners, we're good friends, United States and Taiwan. So I think both sides will want to work what is best for Taiwan and for the peace stability of Taiwan.
Our conversation with Taiwan's representative to the U.S., Tah-ray Yui, here on Balance of Power. Coming up, the Supreme Court preserving access to the widely used abortion pill Mifepristone, but there are some other big decisions from the High Court ahead, and one today on bump stocks. We'll assemble our political panel next for their thoughts on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Supreme Court and its right-wing majority is clearly out of control and out of step with the American people, which is why its approval rating is even lower than that of the United States Congress. Clearly, work needs to be done to rein in the Supreme Court, particularly as it relates to its inability to police itself with respect to ethics.
A lot there from Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House, talking to reporters about recent decisions made by the Supreme Court. And we'll pick through some of these rulings now with our political panel. Rick Davis of Stonecourt Capital is with us alongside Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Jeanne, he just said a lot. We can get into the ethical matters in a moment here. But as far as the two rulings go this week, today the Supreme Court striking down a federal ban on bump stocks, but yesterday upheld access to the abortion pill Mifepristone. So is this court really out of touch with the American people?
They are out of touch. Let's not forget, the Mifepristone decision was purely on standing. The people who brought the case did not have standing to bring the case. And I think many people you talk to today are deeply concerned that when they get other litigants, and they will, that it could easily be changed. They could easily change their minds. So particularly the more conservative members of the court. So we remain vulnerable on that issue. And then, of course, today, I think one of the most devastating decisions we've seen out of the Supreme Court, and to hear Justice Sonia Sotomayor read the dissent so impassioned from the bench speaks to this. How many people have to die? Las Vegas, over 500 wounded, over 58 killed. And you're telling me because of a 1934 law that bump stocks are constitutional? They are incredibly out of touch with the horror that's been occurring as a result of gun violence. And so this speaks to what Hakeem Jeffries was talking about in terms of their low approval rating.
Rick, we hear often that some of these issues, gun control perhaps being one, abortion being another, they may be important, but they rank lower than, say, the economy or immigration. But we were just speaking with Celinda Lake, who's a Democratic pollster, and she said they may rank lower when you're asked about importance. But when asked on what you're going to vote on, abortion is a turnout driver. Should we be thinking about these issues in terms of how they may drive people to the polls in November?
Yeah, I think a lot of these reflect people's values, and people aren't willing to accommodate compromise with their values. So that drives them out, right? So some of these issues drop below that into just being issues, and they'll trade off an issue one day to the next in order to get something else they want. So I think you got to look within that and make a determination as to what is motivating some voters. Everybody has a different take on what their value system is, but that's usually the primary driver for turnout or for who you choose to vote for. I would say, I mean, I think Hakeem Jeffries makes a case in the sense that what the court has really been telling Congress quite some time now is do your job. We have a separation of power, right? And the court only is turning these issues away like the bump stock because Congress didn't do what they were supposed to do and pass a law to outlaw that. So whether it's on, assault weapons or bump stocks or other kinds of things that have come up before Congress, I mean, all Hakeem Jeffries has to do is start working out a deal with the Republicans, and I know how hard that sounds, but, go do your job. That's your job to pass laws, not the Supreme Court. Last thing I want to do is see the Supreme Court start legislating from the bench.
Fair point. 3 branches of government for a reason. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino will be sticking with us because coming up, former President Trump is back on the campaign trail this weekend in the swing state of Michigan, as the debate with President Biden is now just under 2 weeks away. We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think also people don't like seeing Trump. His most effective ads are actually when he's not talking and not in them. And so I think that's one of the things of the debate. People will get to see Donald Trump again, and they're going to go, oh, my gosh, I had no idea he looked this old and he's this stooped and he's this crazy.
That was Democratic pollster Celinda Lake, president of Lake Research Partners, on with us moments ago here on Balance of Power. And back with us now, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors. So, Rick, she said that to us when I brought up the fact that Donald Trump turned 78 today. He's only 3 years younger than Joe Biden, doesn't seem to face the same age and mental acuity questions to the same extent that Biden does. But we're about to see both of them next to each other on stage in a debate less than 2 weeks from now. How are each of them preparing for this already, given the stakes of the moment?
Yeah, well, the anecdotal evidence in the press indicates that they're not very interested in doing a lot of preparation. I mean, the Trump campaign has basically said, oh, he's ready to go. He doesn't need any practice. And his debate team is basically his key campaign staffers. They haven't brought anybody in from outside. And Biden is like, well, I'm busy. I'm flying back and forth to the West Coast. I'm coming in from, Europe. I got other things I got to do. I got to be president. The reality is he doesn't get to be president anymore if he doesn't do a good job at this debate. So I don't know. I think red flag on both. Warning. These things actually require some preparatory work and some thinking. And if you're not thinking, you won't do well.
Well, you've prepared a number of candidates for this, so you know a lot more about this than most Americans. Jeanne, are you worried? Joe Biden in 3 different time zones in 1 week? Apparently, they have set some time aside to be at Camp David in the days leading up to this debate. But for the president specifically, with the age question hanging over him, people are going to be watching very closely. Is he going to be able to do this?
We hope so. He does have to be prepared. He does need rest. They're saying he'll get about a week. We can't forget the Democrats chose this debate. They knew about all of these dates he had in advance, and they asked for this. So I'm hoping they did so understanding that the president needs to prepare. He has debated Donald Trump twice. Donald Trump, I think it's going to be interesting. His team says no preparation needed. He's going to knock it out of the park. Something about stamina, Stephen Miller said. And the expectations for Joe Biden are low, and that's the way he wants to go into this. The lower the expectations, the better, because then if he does fairly well, it'll be chalked up as a win. So they're hoping that he's able to do that.
Well, before we can get to the debate, we've got to get through this weekend. Joe Biden's going to be at a big fundraiser alongside the likes of George Clooney. That's Donald Trump is going to be in the swing state of Michigan. What's more important at this stage of the campaign, Rick, being in the swing states or going to raise money with flashy people?
Oh, I mean, I'm a campaign manager by trade. I mean, I'd much rather be in Michigan all day long. Tell George Clooney to do it himself. They don't want to see Biden anyway. They want to see Clooney. So, yeah, go to Michigan. Drop in on Trump. I think that'd be great prep work for the debate, is just show up at the same event. No, I think that it's advantage Trump this weekend, right? I mean, this election will not be decided by money. It'll be decided by 6 or 7 states, and Trump's going to be in one of them. It ain't going to be California.
Celinda was asking which Donald Trump shows up. Jeanne, which Joe Biden shows up for the debate? Is it the one we saw at the State of the Union?
I think so. They're hoping so. And I would be okay with going to the George Clooney event as opposed to with Byron Donalds and who else? I mean, you know, he keeps saying that he's going out to Michigan to shore up the black vote. That's very important. But George Clooney, he's got some friends out there. I'd be okay.
Yeah, he's got some friends, all right. I think Barack Obama might be around for that, too. Thanks, Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our signature panel on Balance of Power. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter with all your free time this week, and you can find it on the terminal and online.
Thanks for being with us throughout what was a crazy, busy week. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. We'll see you back here on Monday on Bloomberg TV and radio.